Welcome to the Mom Room. Today I'm speaking with Zoe Blaskey, all the way in London.
Just outside, but yeah, it'll do.
Okay. Yeah, London. It's like me. I'm in Guelph. I'm an hour outside of Toronto, but I'm like, yeah, I'm from Toronto.
Toronto, yeah, exactly. Yes. I'm like 2 hours from London, but whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
No.
Doesn't matter. So I wanted to ask, obviously you have a big platform. You have a big podcast all about motherhood. And I was wondering how you ended up doing what you're doing today. I love hearing people's stories because what we do is very unique. Like, we all have a unique story.
It's a funny story. And it's always, when I ask people this question, it's so fascinating to me how it's never what they thought they'd be doing. And that is exactly the case with me. So I was like super high achieving, like in a corporate career. I was always really, really interested in well-being. So at the end of my corporate career, so for like 5 years of my last corporate career, I'd be like in a suit Monday to Friday, and then I'd be on like a meditation retreat at the weekend, but I wouldn't tell anyone. Like they'd be like, good weekend. Yeah, great. I'd actually been like chanting on some random island somewhere, but I wouldn't tell anyone that. And so that was kind of always rumbling. And I always had this dream, like, oh, I wonder if one day I could do something for myself. Like it would definitely, I knew it would be around well-being or coaching because I was trained as a coach already in my corporate career. And then I became a mum 8 years ago, and I could not believe how underprepared I was emotionally. I'd never really felt guilt. I mean, a little bit of guilt, like, you know, like if I forgot a friend's birthday, but the guilt was like on me all of a sudden. And my relationship felt like it was really bad. I was like, oh my God, I think we might not survive this. Like, what is going on? And I really struggled with, in the first year of my little girls, crying would literally, I couldn't cope with it. I would dissociate. I now know I didn't know those words for it then. And so I started to pick up parenting books, and it enraged me, like what I was reading in the parenting books. I was like, none of these are talking about how I feel as the primary carer. Like they just seem to be talking about set a boundary, do this. And I was like, but I'm like on the floor here. Like I'm exhausted. I am not coping emotionally. So I was like, it's not a problem. I'll just find all the resources that are talking about that. And I'll go on those retreats and I'll go on those workshops and I'll read those books. And I found nothing. When I first started looking into the mum space in the UK, the best-selling book was called Hurrah for Gin, and it was really funny. And it was all about how basically the only way through is to drink every night.
Right.
But I was sober, like I hadn't drunk for a long time. So I was like, well, that's great, that can't help me. And then a lot of the other parenting content aimed at mums was kind of celebrities, like telling their stories. And I was like, this is not what I want. Like, so I started just doing for my own research. I started reading around things like matrescence. I started reading about trauma and generational cycles and emotions and feelings and motherhood identity. And I didn't read any parenting books. These were all sort of just around the subject. And I started telling people about what I was discovering, because I was really different. I'd started to put into place some of the things that I was learning. And a friend said, oh, you should start a blog about this. Like, other people would want to know about what you're learning. You might as well share it. And I thought, what an amazing idea. And I thought, actually, no, because I wouldn't have read a blog. I didn't have time. And there was a big movement in the UK of mummy bloggers, and I just didn't see myself as a mummy blogger. I don't know why. So I thought, what about podcast? And my initial thought was, no way. Like I hate tech. I don't like my photo being taken, let alone my face being on any sort of video. I don't like my voice. I'm not doing it. But then, as is so often when something is in your path, it just wouldn't leave me alone. And so I said to myself, okay, I'm going to record 6 episodes of this podcast. And the deal I made to myself was that I didn't have to put them out. I was like, just record 6 and you don't have to put them out. I didn't tell the guests that was my plan. And so I got 6 recorded, and actually I loved it. And I could see that, excruciating as I found hearing my own voice, it was worth it. And I think there's so many unbelievable insights about starting and getting through resistance and being willing to be really shit at the start. I was really shit at the start. And I just kept going. Like you were sharing, I just kept going. I just made a commitment to do an episode a week, and I could see how much it was helping me and healing me. And I could see how I was starting to build it and get lots of messages from people saying how it was helping them. Because when I first started, we were really the only one doing what we were doing. There wasn't any others. So yeah, that's how I came to start it. And it's been 6 years and we've never missed a week. So it's a lot of episodes.
That is wild. So it's been 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so at what point, when you had your daughter, is that when you left the corporate world, or were you kind of doing the podcast and that for a while and then no?
So I left the corporate world before I had her.
Okay.
Mainly because I had a boss at the time. The MD of the division that I was in was a mum of 2. And I thought, I don't want your life. I could see how unsupported she was as a mother.
Yeah.
She wasn't given any spec. And I just thought I could see how corporate and motherhood wasn't going to be the path that I wanted to go down. So I was actually consulting. I'd set up my own little consultancy. And so I was doing that. And I carried on doing that alongside the podcast for about 3 years, because I never thought the podcast would turn into a business. Like right. I didn't understand how people monetize podcasts. I just genuinely had this passion and this fire and this desire to have the conversations that, you know, like the podcast that you and ours have. So yeah, I did that alongside. I thought the podcast will be this kind of thing that's like my passion, and then I'll do these consulting projects on the side as to how I'll earn money. But then what happened was the podcast started to do really, really well.
Yeah.
Which meant that I could just do the podcast.
Oh, I love that. And so on your Instagram bio, it says motherhood coach. So is that something that you do as well? Or is that like, do you work one-on-one with people?
Yeah, I used to. Yeah, I used to. So when I first started, that's what I did. I did that quite a lot because I was trained in coaching. I love coaching. I just think it's the most unbelievable modality to help people tap into their own wisdom. It's quite different than therapy. So yeah, that's what I would do. But what happened over time is that as the podcast and the content and all the stuff that I do with you know, businesses and brands, and that got bigger, I actually have a team of coaches now who do the coaching.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. So I was looking on your Instagram account, and I love the content that you put out. And one of the reels that I came across was about self-care. And I love this topic because I think a lot of moms struggle in early motherhood, especially. And it's almost like this thought like, oh, just have a bubble bath and everything, like that 1 hour in the bubbles is going to just, you know, cure everything. So can you talk a little bit about self-care and what you do yourself for self-care? Like, what do you envision self-care being?
Yeah, I actually have stopped using the phrase self-care because I think, as you just alluded to, it's become so linked to things that we do to our outer selves. Like you'll hear people say, oh, I'm getting my nails done, self-care. Yeah. Or I just got a new oil or a new candle, moment of self-care. And brands have caught on to this. As in the UK, I'm sure it's the same way you are, where they will market these products as a moment of self-care. So actually, I think for mums, it's kind of bordering on offensive, because actually we know the stress that our bodies are holding in motherhood. We know the level of energy and resilience that it takes to show up day after day when you're exhausted and be the mother that you want to be. I don't think we need, you know, a bubble bath isn't going to touch the sides. So I think I see it in 2 ways. The first piece is, you know, the support that we actually need. And I think that's around, you know, from our friends, from our partners, from society. And that takes a while. That's a longer term play in terms of how much we actually need from people around us to do motherhood the way we want to. And the second thing I think about way more is energy management, which is actually about how you feel. It's got nothing to do with if your nails are done or if you've had your roots done. It's about how resourced, luckily for me, how resourced do you feel internally? Like, I think that is what's important.
So like how much energy, or like, is it how fulfilled you feel or how much energy you have?
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're really linked, aren't they? I think everything comes down to how you feel. So how stressed do you feel? How much bandwidth have you got to deal with the stresses that are coming at you? You know, how resourced do you feel? Even like simple things like, are you hydrated? Are you eating the right food? Like, this is what's really important. And I think when we shove that self-care Band-Aid on, all of that gets missed. Mm-hmm. And I think what's really fascinating when we think about energy management instead of self-care is that every single one of us is different. So what gives you energy, RENEE, might drain mine, and vice versa. But so much of the self-care conversation has become about do these 5 things. And we've lost that sense of nuance and individuality. So I teach this really simple tool, which is work out what gives you energy, work out what drains your energy, and day by day, start doing more of what gives you energy in tiny little 1%, and start doing less of what's draining your energy in tiny little 1%. And in a couple of weeks, you will feel differently internally.
What drains you and gives you energy?
My biggest drain is actually a surprising one, and it's procrastination.
Oh, it's like a weight on my shoulders. It's just,
when I'm sitting with something that I know that I've got to do that's important with the kids or with myself or with the business, and I just don't want to get to it, I can literally feel my energy draining away. Same thing with like denial. Like, no, everything's fine. I don't need to look at that. And only me will know about it, that I'm sort of doing that. But again, I find that just a massive drain. Same with gossip, same with judgment. Like, it's often these internal things that I do that drain my energy the most. Being around the wrong type of people, again, really drains my energy too.
What gives you energy?
Gives me energy is my work, luckily. Like connecting, being honest, the sun on my face, getting out for a walk. If I don't get out in a day, I really feel it. But I find it so hard. I've actually got this list on my office wall because I get so in flow with my work, and then my work, it's like your work. It never ends. There will never be a point where I'll be like, oh, my work is done. No, it's like I need to be boundaried and be like, Zoe, close your laptop, leave your phone at home and go for half an hour walk. I will always come back feeling more energized, but I face a lot of mental resistance, even now doing that.
Yeah. You know what I started to do, which has been so amazing? I printed out, I just went on Etsy and I found these schedules. It's like a weekly outline. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's like cute and colorful. So I'll print out a ton of those. And then Monday morning, Milo's at school. As soon as I have a moment, I sit at my desk with my coffee and I look at my calendar and I actually write out everything that has to be done. So recording here, meeting here, I have to get all the YouTube stuff up, make clips, edit. Like I put everything down, and then I see visually the pockets where I have nothing, and I could go to yoga, go for a walk, because I'm like you. I will go, not take time to eat properly, not take time to go for a walk. My hips are like aching because I'm just sitting here like editing videos or whatever I'm doing. And then all of a sudden it's 4:00 or 3:30 and I have to go get my son. And I've done nothing for myself. Like, yes, I love doing what I'm doing work-wise, but I need to do the other things too in order to feel like I had a productive whole day. You know, I got a lot of work done, but I also ate properly. I also went for a walk, and it makes a big difference. I love my little weekly schedule. It sounds nerdy, but
I love that. I love that. It is such a good idea. My equivalent of that is having this list on my wall, because I look at it, I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing that thing, I'm procrastinating, or I'm, doing something else that drives my energy and I need to get out for a walk. Like, it really helps me. I think what we make visual and what we schedule happens. Our mental load is already so high. If we rely on ourselves to remember to do that thing, or it's really hard. I think we have to make things visual and put them in the schedule and keep that appointment with ourselves like we would a podcast or a work meeting.
Yeah. It's so true, right? That's what I was saying, I think, on your podcast. Like, if it had to do with Milo or someone else, it's like, oh yeah, it's going to get done. But for me, like, oh, I'll just skip my walk. Like, no, don't skip your walk. And honestly, to go for a walk, or I even quite enjoy the drives to pick up Milo or drive him to school, because my brain is turned off, if that makes sense. Like, I love driving because I can't do anything else. Whereas at home, I'm like, I'll put something in the microwave and it's like, okay, 30 seconds. What can I do in 30 seconds? It's like ridiculous. Whereas if I'm driving, it's just like, oh, scenery and listening to a podcast. Yeah. One of the posts of yours that I loved, that I relate to so much, was why high achieving women struggle with anxiety in postpartum. Like, this post was me in a nutshell, and why I didn't enjoy the really young years, if that makes sense. Like, now that he's 5 years old, he's more independent. You can have a conversation with him. Like, things are more in control, let's say, like more predictable. I find it much more enjoyable. So I thought I'll list out the 4 things and maybe you can speak to them a little bit. And then also, was that, like, tell me your experience with that. So not being in control in postpartum.
These words aren't mine, but someone put just exactly what was in my head. And I was like, this is really what I was experiencing, but couldn't put those words to it. And I think it affects a particular type of woman. We would call it a kind of, type A, high functioning, go, because having a baby in that postpartum period is the opposite of all of the ways that we've lived up until that point. It's very slow. You're often at home a lot. If you've got any sort of leave from work,
you can't get anything done.
You can't get anything done. So if you've been someone who's equated your worth to your productivity, that I was, suddenly you start to feel like, oh my God, have I got any worth? Like, I achieved nothing today. It's highly unpredictable. And what I've noticed is that there's this real correlation between perfectionism, high achieving, and control. Like, those come together. And there's, I've got loads of thoughts about where that comes from. That comes from our own early years and how that got installed in us. But what I've noticed is that, and I'm one of those women who have that desire to do things really well, really high standards, like to feel in control, like things around them to be organized and orderly. And often these are the women that will say, I have to have my house in order, or I can't think straight. Suddenly you throw in a baby and it can feel like a huge unraveling, really disconcerting. And that can bring up, anxiety, because all those coping tools and the way that you've kept yourself feeling on top of life suddenly it's like a plaster being ripped off.
I used to live by myself. I also think there's something about having children later in life. Like, my mom had all 3 kids by the time she was 28. And so they're all 4 years apart there. I'm talking as if it's not me. So she started like early 20s, let's say. I had Milo when I was 34, after doing, 10 plus years of grad school, living on my own in a little apartment. Everything was perfect in the apartment. I could clean the whole place top to bottom in 45 minutes, Everything was very much, like you said, in control. And then after all those years of being an adult, living by myself, being very much in control, being able to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, like, then you have a child. And like you said, that all gets like flipped upside down. And babies come with, like, there's stuff all over the place. You cannot control it. They're also unpredictable. Like, you can't control your schedule anymore. Like, you're just kind of like roaming around the house, like without a plan, like just like it's a totally different experience. And I think I struggled with that for sure.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's the other thing that I noticed sort of links to that is, and I alluded to it before, is often that type of women, me included, like to keep our emotions very buttoned down. Like I, put things in a box. Like, yes, I feel a bit angry about that, but I'm just going to put that in a box. I mean, they're going to ignore that, or I might, get it out, but I certainly wouldn't show anyone that. Like this is, I was really like this before, I had children and learned what I have now about emotions. Like I was just loving to put my emotions in a box and keep it all very orderly and all very tidy. And children are just essentially like balls of emotion. In fact, that's all they are for the first 5 years. They don't have that sort of rational part of their brain turned on yet. So I think as well, like that can also just feel like, oh my gosh, like what is this emotional wrecking ball? Who's just crying and screaming and angry and flailing. And that can in turn, right, trigger all of our inability to feel our own feelings. And so it's almost like we're just thrown into this, upside down, chaotic place where everything that we used to do to keep feeling happy, orderly, joyful people doesn't work anymore. And we have to learn new ways. And that's really when the podcast started to change my life, is when I started to learn, okay, so I can't control everything. What do I do? Okay, so I can't put my emotions in a box, and I know that I have to validate theirs because these 27 psychologists, I'm still trying to find a psychologist who says that isn't important. They don't exist. I'm like, so I have to learn how to do this. I have to learn how to do this. Okay, so my perfectionism is just, I can't have these high standards of myself anymore. I'm going to have to find my worth from elsewhere. How the hell am I going to do that? And learning all of those things has what's completely changed, healed me really. It completely changed who I am as a person, where now I can validate my emotions. I've got a really strong sense of worth that I never had before because it all unraveled. I had to go get a new map. It's almost like I had this old map, which was like control, orderly, worth is productive, be successful. I had to lob that out, be like, okay, new map. Emotions matter. Like, allow it to be messy. You're worthy as you are. Good enough's good enough. Like I literally had to switch directions.
I always I look around the house. There's just toys everywhere, like Legos and just all the things. And like I said before, when I lived by myself, everything was perfect. And it's hard. It's almost like a mindset shift. Like I need to be able to look at the house messy and not perfect and understand that there's a 5-year-old that lives here and a dog, a very furry dog, and just let it go. Like you have to learn to be okay with a not perfect house, if that makes sense. But it's hard. Like our dining room table, like we have not eaten at the dining room table in so long because there's puzzles on it. There's like paper and markers, and that's where we do activities. It's like we've been so conditioned to like have a dining room table and eat at the table with your family at this time, and like to use certain parts of the house in a certain way, and they have to look a certain way. But really, we're a family with a 5-year-old child that likes to do puzzles and draw. And so we're going to make our house functional for how we live, as opposed to, trying to match what the houses on Pinterest look like. But it's hard. It's hard. Like we went to Disneyland last week, and I was like so into all the Disney stuff. And I was like, what if I just decorated my house in Disney stuff? Like, would that be so frowned upon? Like, no, do what you want, RENEE. Like, you don't have to have a Pinterest perfect house. But for some reason, that's what we're all trying to have,
Yeah. And I think there is something in that, tidy mind, tidy house. But I think it's like I'm obsessed with this really simple tool, which is like, what can I control? What can't I control? And I think sometimes in that can control column, it's like, okay, I just want to make my bedroom like toy free, tidy, orderly, so that I can go into that room at the end of the day and actually relax. But for the rest of it, it's going to stress me out too much. It's almost looking at like always the cost benefit, isn't it? Like, what's the cost of having this messy house? Okay, well, it makes me feel a bit disorganized. But actually, what's the benefit? It means that I can, spend more time playing. Like you said, I'm playing at the kitchen table. I'm not cleaning the kitchen table the whole time. And I have my mum, I'm just so grateful to her because she was someone where our house was like a show home. It was unreal. Nothing was ever out of place. And she always says to me, I wasted 20 years tidying up. She's like, don't do it. And I always have that voice in my head. She's like, I really regret the hours and hours and hours. I'm not talking about being like hygienic and clean. I'm talking about like, next level. And so I think it's really important, like everything in motherhood, it's being like, what is important to me? And I think asking that question is probably one of the most important questions you can ask yourself in motherhood, because otherwise everything's going to seem important, because social media is going to tell you that it's important to do phonics, to cook from scratch, to have a perfect home, to look a certain way, to do a certain... Everything's going to seem important, and you're going to start comparing yourself against these ridiculous standards. Whereas if you know what is actually important to you, it is like a bit of a superpower, because then you can put your time, energy, effort there and let go of the rest. Like, I've decided emotional validation is the thing that I'm going to nail. I'm nailing it. But my house is really messy and my kids sometimes don't do their homework. But that's the choice that I've made and we've made. Yeah. And I think that's so important for everyone listening to think, just what is important for me? Like, what is the thing that I want to nail and what can I let go? Because when we can do that, it's incredibly validating. You save loads of time and loads of stress and loads of worry.
Yeah, so true. Especially if both parents are working all week. I always say to myself, like, I could clean this house spick and span. Obviously, it's not going to last long, because as soon as we take out Legos and puzzles, like, it's going to just get messy again. My son is 5. He's really into trick shots, like flipping water bottles and like throwing ping pong balls into like the red Solo cups. So that's just all over the house. Like water bottles with just a little bit of water at the bottom all over the house. But like, he enjoys that right now. So that's what our house looks like. But I always say, like, I could take a Sunday, tidy the whole house, put everything away, organize closets, do all of that. But like, this is our weekend to actually do something and spend time together. And I would rather go for a walk or, take Bubbles to PetSmart and look at the goldfish, or, do something and then get done what has to get done, empty the dishwasher, do the laundry. Like, yeah, we're pretty good at doing what has to be done and keeping the house clean, but it's definitely not tidy. Like, there's stuff all over the place, but I've learned to kind of let that go. And like you said, it's like a choice. I'm going to go for a walk right now instead of, putting all the toys back in the cupboard. So, the other things that for the high achieving women struggling with anxiety and postpartum, I just want to list the 4 things in case people want to know exactly what they were. So it was not being in control, not being organized, not being able to get shit done. I don't know. I don't think they use the word shit, but I wrote it down on my card. And then things are unpredictable. Like, there's no certainty in postpartum. I wanted to get into the topic of balance because I liked your post on this, and I talk about this a lot. It's kind of the idea of having it all, like having everything 100%, everything's balanced. So what's your take on having balance in our lives when it comes to motherhood?
I think balance is another one of those words, like self-care, that has just become a word that we used to beat ourselves up with. Like, I can't tell you how many women have come to me and said, I just want some balance. Everything's so out of balance. I just want balance. The reality is, if you think about what balance actually means, it would be like some scales and it would be perfectly weighted between all the different things in your life and static. And that is never going to happen. I think if we can just throw that idea of balance out the window. We open ourselves up to so much more freedom to actually think about, okay, what are all the things in my life? What is really important to me? Am I putting my time, effort, and energy, my really limited resource, into what's important to me? What can I let go? What can I deprioritize? And where do I need some boundaries? So I always think about boundaries, not balance, because I think if we can think, okay, work-life balance, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
But if we ask ourselves a better question, which is, what boundaries do I need with my work? Like, what time do I want to stop checking emails? Do I need to have a meeting-free morning on a Wednesday so that I can take my child here or do drop? When we ask ourselves that question, what boundaries do I need? It's way more powerful, because we're going to get better answers that we can actually do something about. Whereas if we just have this idea of balance floating above our heads, thinking, I need it, it doesn't make sense. And I really see that we just use it to beat ourselves up. I need more balance. What does it even mean? What does it even mean? It's not real. I've spoken to, like you have on your podcast, some of the most prolific, smart women who are also mothers in the world, and none of them have got any balance. Sometimes work needs you more and you've got to just go for it. Sometimes home life needs you more and you have to just go for it. Sometimes you have a sick parent and you have to drop everything and go for that. Sometimes, there's just a million different curveballs at any one moment. And I think when we give ourselves the freedom to just go for what is required of us in that moment, let go of this idea of a perfect balance.
Yeah.
There's so much more freedom and compassion in that.
There was a quote, Lauren Bostic, she's a podcast host and a influencer. Anyways, she said this quote on her podcast before, and I think about it all the time. And it's with regard to balance. She said, you can have it all, but just not at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's
exactly.
like so perfect. In September of last year, I had Matthew McConaughey on the podcast, which was like mind blowing. I still haven't processed that. But I was like, okay, I have this like big time, celebrity actor coming on the podcast. I'm going to ask him what he feels like the past 15 years of his life, like if he had a good balance between work life and family life and all those things. And he responded exactly what you were saying. He's like, I am happy with it, but you know what? There were seasons of life where I'm working on a movie like somewhere over here, and career was the number one thing. And that's what was taking up most of my time. And then, between movies, it's like I'm a dad and family is 100%. That's what's taking up most of my time. And so it's kind of like a up and down throughout life. And I was like, thank you. Like that's perfect. And it's nice that, it was nice to know that he feels the same way too. So
yeah, that's exactly it. And I think there's just some of these ideas that float around for us mothers, like having it all, like self-care, like balance, that we just need to really not let those get under our skin and let these ideas use us as something that we can beat ourselves up with, and think more like, do I know what's important to me? What are my values? Like, what is, if I look back when I'm 80 and I look back on this time, like, what do I want to have done? And can I have the confidence and the courage to just go there without beating myself up that I'm somehow doing it wrong?
Yeah. I think less about balance and more about, like, let's think about the last 3 months. What do I wish I spent more time doing? And so then you're able to adjust your schedule moving forward. I want to make time to go to yoga. I want to make time to go for walks. So I'm going to have to cut back on work a little bit and maybe put out like a couple less things per week so that I can fit those other things in, because that's a priority for me. So yeah, it's never balanced. And to be honest, like a day by day is not balanced. Some days like work is crazy and it's like nonstop. And then other days I kind of have a free day. And so I'm able to do other things and make a nice homemade dinner yeah. And I guess it's also just celebrating and being proud of yourself for doing those things. Like, no, I wish I could make a homemade dinner every single day, but that's not in the cards for me right now. And I do my best. And when I do make a dinner, like, it's like, yay, pat on the back. Like, I did it.
But that's knowing your priorities, isn't it? Because if you were someone and that was your top priority, you would make that happen. But that's the same as me. Like, that's just not that high on my priority list. But for someone else, it would be. And I think this is why just taking a moment, like literally a heartbeat, to think, what are my priorities? Like, what is important to me is so powerful.
Yeah.
Because then you get to put the time and the energy and the resource, and you just get to feel less guilty and less shit that you're not doing all the things that everyone else is, because you're like, actually, no, I know that this is what is important to me.
And I think the issue with social media is that we're looking at so many different people, and each one of them has a priority that they showcase on their channel. Exactly. And now we feel like we have to do everything that every single person that we follow is prioritizing, but they're all prioritizing that one thing, whether it be like home cooked meals or organization in the home, or, but now we feel like we have to do all of those things, and it's completely unrealistic.
Exactly. Because that person, that creator, whoever they are, they figured out my number one thing that I love and I want to share about and I want to put all my energy into is home cooking, right? But they're not focusing on, organizing their wardrobe at the same time, or emotional validation or something. So it's they know their priority, but then as consumers, exactly as you say, Renee, we're then thinking, oh my God, I need to be doing home cooking. I need to be, because they're also selling the benefits of those things, right? They've probably got something to sell off the back of it. So they are going to be telling you, your kids' nutrition matters because of this. And if you feed this, it means this. It's so hard with social media to stay discerning as well, because when we go into social media, our brains actually absorb information in a different way. It's harder for us to discern. So again, like, so important who we follow when we open social media, knowing what's important to us, knowing that we're seeing a highlight reel. Although we can say all these things, when we actually open social media, our brain does forget all those things and we go straight into comparison.
Yeah. So true. Okay, let's talk about mom guilt a little bit, because that is a big topic. I was shocked when I became a mom, because you hear about mom guilt and it's kind of like a joke. It's like this, oh, mom guilt. And then I became a mom and I was like, oh my God, this is actually debilitating. And it sucks the enjoyment out of moments that should be enjoyable. So I've talked a lot about it. What was your experience with mom guilt? And then also, can you share tips for listeners who might be experiencing mom guilt? How did you navigate mom guilt?
I mean, like you, Renee, like I'd felt guilty, sure, but I felt so guilty. I wasn't prepared for it. I just felt like everything that I was doing was wrong. That's how I felt. I felt like nothing I was doing was good enough. And so I spent like a long time, 7 years, interviewing, researching, like really trying to understand what the hell is going on here. And actually, what I found out is that it's really complex. Like it's not simple what's really going on with this mum guilt thing. I think I've managed to get it into a simple-ish model that's easy to understand, but it took me 7 years to get there, because it is complicated. And I think part of what's happened is that the emotions around motherhood are so complex and hard to understand that we've just put this label of mum guilt on. So when we feel like our inner critic flares up, or we feel not good enough, or we feel like we're judging ourselves by someone else's standards, those are the things that are really going on, but we call it mum guilt. We're just like, oh, I feel so guilty. I feel so guilty. It's almost as if like it's such a multicolored experience and technicolor emotional experience, motherhood, but we've just painted it all in one color and gone, it's mum guilt. And I think that's why it's so prevalent and it's so difficult sometimes to unravel what's really going on, because guilt actually is a good thing. Like it's only psychopaths who feel no guilt. because you have to feel some empathy for another in order to feel guilty, right? But what's happened in motherhood, and it is gendered, is that we feel guilty for, like, the bulk of what we feel guilty for, like 80%, I call it this 80-20 rule, is actually not guilt at all. We have nothing to feel guilty about. It's other things going on that I can definitely talk you through. But yeah, it's huge and it's complex, and we need to understand it, because otherwise it will eat you alive.
Yeah. I remember in the summertime, Milo was younger. He was very much into Toy Story, and it was a Saturday afternoon, sunny outside, and we just decided to put on Toy Story, and we're sitting there watching a cute movie that we're all enjoying, but I could not enjoy it because I'm like, it's sunny outside, like we should be outside, we should be da-da-da. And I started to realize that, oh, like I'm not able to enjoy this moment of snuggling with my son on a Saturday afternoon watching this movie because I'm so wrapped up in having to go outside, as if that's going to like change his whole life. Like this one Saturday afternoon, like big deal. And so what I started to do was, whether it be like a meal, okay, we're on our way home from swimming lessons, we're going to pick up fast food. Instantly guilt, like, oh my God, I should have made something. Like I need to be better with dinners and like snacks. But I started to zoom out instead of in the moment feeling guilty about these very micro situational things. I will like zoom out. Okay, what have we done in the last 3 months? Like how much have we been outside? Oh, we've been outside a lot. And he actually plays outside every single day for a long time at school. Meals, zoom out. What have we been eating in the last 3 months? Oh, like we eat really well. Like, and it really helps to take yourself out of that moment where the guilt or like the emotions that you're experiencing are preventing you from just enjoying the frickin' fast food meal. Like these fries are delicious,
Exactly. It's such a good one. So much of what else is going on in those moments is that we absorb these standards or ideas or ideals of what we think we should be doing, right?
Yeah.
And so many of them are unconscious. Like if I don't ask you, Renee, do you think a good man watches a movie on a Saturday afternoon? You'd be like, of course she does. But you're in the moment and you're like, this isn't good enough. This isn't good enough. And that isn't that isn't your original idea. Like you've absorbed that from somewhere, that pressure or that standard. And so one of the quickest ways to actually get rid of guilt, it's not guilt. We call it guilt, but it's not guilt, right? But the quickest way to get rid of it is to think like, whose standard is this? Like, whose rule am I abiding by? Who said that I'm not having an amazing time connecting with my son right now? Who said it's not really fun to get McDonald's on the way home? And we're connecting, like, what are these standards? Because, we think that we've got these rational minds that we're making these conscious choices all the time. But actually, the majority of our thoughts and feelings are coming from a place we're not even aware of. Mm. And that's when these things can really start to trip us up.
It's interesting because this made me think of this TikTok or reel that I saw, and it's from this dad podcast. I forget what it's called, but the reel is set up to be like things that your child should be watching, like things that are educational that your child should be watching that isn't going to damage them. So now it's put in my mind that other things that they could be watching might be damaging them. So I see the shows that he recommends and I'm like, okay, that's great. Like they're cute. Like that's nice. But then I thought to myself, like, what's wrong with watching something that's just entertaining? Like when did that become, something that is so awful? So not everything has to be educational. Like, but that's a perfect example of just, mindlessly something catches my attention and now that's put into my head. And I actually meant to do a stitch to that. Maybe I'll do that today to be like, we can watch things for entertainment too. Like we don't just have to be learning something. Like when can our children just shut off their brains and watch The Lion King? Like why does it have to be educational all the time? But yeah, that gets planted in our brains. And then, down the road, Milo's watching someone flip water bottles on YouTube. And I'm like, oh my God, it's damaging him.
And this is part of the problem with, consuming social media, is because I think I know the video that you're talking about. Yeah. And I think the guy isn't a doctor of psychology.
Oh, no, he's just a dad, I think.
And this is the thing. We have to be so discerning with who is he to be using that word damaging based on what research?
Yeah.
And I think it's so important because, as you say, our subconscious, our rational mind might be like, okay, I can see that he's not that person. But actually your subconscious mind totally absorbs that.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, that's how we get into this place of feeling all this guilt and all this pressure.
And we have to also remember that people are putting up content that is kind of clickbaity, that they know will do well because it grabs people's attention. So you also have to be mindful.
That's the only thing that does well, right? Is these hooks that are, controversial. They put them in red writing and it's flashing and it makes it seem like an emergency. Our body actually reacts like it is an emergency. So yeah, I think it's really important to think about how and when you're consuming that social media. It's hard. I try really hard not to do that on my account, but that's probably why it's not as big as some of those others, because I'm not trying to create fear or controversy.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so true. Okay, this was lovely. I definitely want to have you back. Maybe I'll go to London. We can do in person. Oh, that would be. I'll bring my mamere. So
yeah, bring
just
it
in case.
And bring Harry Styles along too.
Yeah, maybe we can get Harry and go for dinner. So can you tell everybody where they can find you and what your podcast is called? And yeah, this was great.
Yeah, podcast is called Motherkind Podcast. You'll find it on all platforms. We do 2 episodes a week, and on Instagram, which is mainly where I am. I'm not on TikTok yet.
You're not missing anything anymore. It's not the same.
Is Zoe Blaskey.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was lovely.
Thank you. You too.
And I'm on a roll.